Today, I'd like to take the opportunity. I did have a press conference on the start of the work that has been outsourced to Embrace to unlock the potential of our youth and future leaders. I would like to reiterate that this is a well-needed survey so that we can have a good insight as to what our needs are as a country in developing our labor market and preparing our students to be able to fill those positions first and foremost. So all who are approached to assist in giving the feedback necessary, I implore you to cooperate with us so that we can get a good idea of what is needed. All who feel that they have information to share and have not been approached, they can find Ms. Jackie Lewis at jacquelinelewis@msn.com or at 721-581-7973. It is very important that all who have a contribution to make to this endeavor do so. Also, to update on the study financing requests that have come in so far, the deadline has elapsed, and we have received 203 requests for students to further their education with assistance from government. The applications are 140 for the region and 63 for Europe. I can go into the different areas of study, the most popular being business, psychology, social work, nursing, education, medicine, law, and ICT. Those were the ones that had the most, that were applied for the most. And those two things were connected, and of course, the study that is being done now will also be cross-referencing the actual students who are studying and those who are where they are in terms of finalizing their studies. On another note, I have been repeatedly asked for an update on the ministry's stance on the institution known as NIPA, which is run by the board AVE. As a matter of course, many may have seen in the newspapers or heard on the streets that a lien was also placed on the school for failure to pay court-ordered fees to one of the employees, as well as that they had lost yet another case. These continue to be very alarming developments at the institution, and as minister in my role, to be able to make sure that the quality of education is assured for NIPA and that the rights and responsibilities of the management and staff are clearly defined, as well as that the institution lives up to its responsibility as per agreements made in providing SBO education according to the subsidy, which has been granted. I have taken the following steps. We have requested the financial statements on several occasions. On November 10th, before stepping in here, the former minister asked them to provide financial statements. This was not done. November 24th, an extension was requested. On December 4th, such was granted until December 18th. And the board was also invited to a meeting to discuss the state of affairs. On December 10th, I was informed as minister by the executive director of the NIPA that the board is requesting a postponement of the meeting, which was scheduled for December 17th, so said meeting did not take place. As a consequence of this non-compliance, the SOAB, Stichting Overheids Accountants Bureau, will be ordered to conduct a full audit of the financial administration of Board AVE. The SOAB is the internal accountant of the government of St. Martin, en as stipulated in Artikel 2 of de Landsverordening tot wijziging, aanwijzing van de Stichting Overheids Accountantsbureau. Als interne accountant, the board will be informed about this decision via the Department of Education, about the process and procedures related to this audit. NIPA has 2 weeks as of the date of a letter dated January 27th, which was sent to them, to provide their audited financial yearly reports as stipulated in the Subsidy Ordinance, Article 16. If the reports are not received on the due dates, the advance payments to NIPA will be stopped immediately by the Finance Department until further notice. This is, of course, with the approval of the Council of Ministers, which has been submitted to the Council of Ministers as a matter of procedure as well. The second step was to execute an extensive control by the Inspectorate of Education, Culture, Youth and Sports. The purpose of this control was to determine the exact number of full-time students attending, the exact number of teachers, whether the teachers had valid contracts and were placed in the correct scales, the dispensation, whether the dispensation had been granted, whether the school has a complete and functional schedule, whether the school has an administration system with updated study results for all the students, whether the school has minutes of report card progress meetings held for the period August 2015, December 2015. And I have received that report, which is quite lengthy. And while there are small improvements, it is overall not a very clear picture of improvements that can be acceptable, that there are still too many things not going correct at the NIPA. The board has also received this report from the NIPA. Sorry, the NIPA has also, received it from the inspectorate and have until today to give their final comments on it. So we have not yet received their final comments on it. The temporary suspension of the subsidy. On December 24th, the Division Comptabiliteit was informed that despite numerous requests for the extension and an extension of the deadline, dat de Stichting ter Bevordering van Secundair Beroepsonderwijs en Education, Board AVE, failed to submit their audited reports to 14 financial report. Considering the above mentioned, the division was requested to temporarily suspend the subsidy payments as well. We are in ongoing meetings with the lawyer for government, Mr. Gibson Jr., and though we were advised not to dismiss the board as that is not within the purview of the minister, we are in our rights to take them to court, which we are currently building up the dossier to do so. The request from the inspectorate, certain information we also sought were on whether some complaints were made by the staff about APS and SZV fees. SZV does not inform or provide third parties with information whether or not it is complying, the board is complying, so we were not able to get that information as third parties. And we are also investigating the current constellation of the board in order to move forward. And seeing the recent developments in the lien that has been placed and the statements that from staff members that they have not been paid as well, we will be investigating that as well, and any other mismanagement that can be proven of the board, they can be held personally liable for it as well. So the ministry is in no way neglecting its duties to provide education and quality education at this institution. This institution is a very important one for government, and we are doing all that we can within the means and the law to be able to bring this situation and turn it around. Thank you very much.
When will the subsidy, the temporary suspension of the subsidy go into effect? I didn't think I hear that part.
That correspondence was sent to Comptabiliteit in December, so it would have been then the one that we do about now. That's temporary. We have not ascertained whether it was actually done, though. And one of the reasons that it's not deemed as the subsidy that was provided over 2015, based on the numbers. What I neglected to say during the presentation was that the numbers that had been projected earlier, there had been talk that it had dropped drastically. So there was a long period of time for which NIPA received more subsidy than they're actually required to run the school. So they were in no peril of not having enough funds to be able to take care of their operations. The temporary suspension was to be able to get these financial statements. As such, they have not yet been received. So that is why if they are not submitted in February, as I stated, that the request will be then to stop it completely.
Thank you, Minister Jacobs. I now move to Minister Lee. Minister Lee, you said the departments, and one of the departments you mentioned, the Department of Labor, they are on top of things. I've had several complaints from employees that have been dismissed from various institutions, one being Sonesta Great Bay, where long-standing employees are being sent home for whatever reasons, and the department seemingly is taking very long to deal with these cases. Another thing I would like to know, because I remember a few years ago, documents and all sorts of things seems to disappear, claiming that they were break-in at the Labor Department, and then there's no backup. Since taking office, do you know if the department is now up to par? And let's say there is a breaking, is there any way that we can retrieve those information? And further to that question, do we have, or does the Department of Labor have a registration for the unemployed? Because there are people who are collecting what you call, understand, or unemployment money, but are they registered on the unemployment list so that they can probably get a job at some point?
I believe that one of the requirements for receiving Understand is that they need to be registered as unemployed. So I believe that that number should be an accurate number. In terms of documents being stolen from the department, I'm not aware of that. I am aware that, one of the first things that I found out when I came in as minister that was a bit surprising was that they did have a computer system failure, I think in July of 2014, where they basically lost that data in a computerized format. I understand they still have the paper backup, but that data loss, I think, was, in my mind, that's very sad, because having all of that information on computer obviously gives you the possibility to query your database and to look, in terms of when you're developing policy, look for facts and figures to back that up. So I understand that they can get high-level data, but in terms of generating specific queries into that, apparently that ability has been lost for data before July of 2014. So the department has been clearly instructed to make sure that proper power backup, proper data backup on all of those things are in place going forward. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that we're working on in the cabinet is even improving the, let's say, the quality of the data that's currently being entered into the system, so that we can even query further into the database. In other words, more from a policy perspective, I believe that there's some fields that still need to be added to that database. And so that's something that the ministry is working on, is, how do we improve not only the data that's entered, but also the depth of the data that's there and the types of queries that we'll be able to answer. In terms of your repeated questions about the Sonesta, if complaints have been filed at Labor Affairs, they're being dealt with. So I'm not getting involved in terms of specific cases, other than making sure that the department is being proactive. I do know that they have some staffing issues, as everybody knows, with budget constraints. Most of the departments in their formation plans were still missing some staff members. But that's something that's not going to be resolved on the short term. But I do believe that they have sufficient staff to perform properly, perhaps not as fast as everyone would like, but I think within the legal timeframes that they're supposed to be operating.
Thank you, Minister Lee. Prime Minister, I noticed the Minister of Romy was here, but then left. I just don't know why. But then I will ask you the question. Couple of days, going on weeks, there are, or if possible months, since you were a member of parliament, there's a lot of uproar at GEBE, which might cost the government. I mean, there are things that are happening at GEBE that is appalling. Just recently, the temporary manager resigned. There are salary increases done moments before his letter of resignation was submitted. There are people waiting to be appointed on the board. Has the Council of Ministers taken any decision as to appoint board members and as well a managing board or a temporary manager so that the company can function?
Thank you, Bibi. It is no public secret, depending on where people go for their information, that the operations of GBE have been under stress for quite some time. to some extent where it can be described as there is something seriously wrong at GEBE, where information constantly appears on blogs. I think it is rather distasteful that the receipts of a director who goes for lunch appear on the blogs. Confidential information, confidential reports appear on the blogs, sometimes even before those who they're destined for. It is out there. Now, if people feel that that's the way transparency has to work, then I think we are heading in the wrong direction. Like I discussed with the board of GBE not too long ago, can you imagine if a director of GB comes to me as a banker to discuss a possible transaction with GBE, that I would be reluctant to provide them with confidential information, because probably before the information reaches where it has to, it appears on blogs and everybody can read what a manager or an employee in a bank wrote to somebody in GEBE. That is not the way we are supposed to go, not as GEBE, and certainly not as country. It affects the functioning of the company. It affects the trust employees have in that company. It breaks down the integrity of the company, and at the end of the day, not only the employees, but the company and the country as a whole would suffer. It does not mean that if something wrong happens somewhere that it should not be exposed, but there are ways and means to do things. So needless to say that the developments at GEBE has had and continues to have the full attention of government. We can assure the people and the employees of GBE that government is dealing with it. There are proposals for board members. There is a discussion on the way forward with the appointment not only as for a manager or a CEO. GB's management structure provides for a CEO, a COO, and a CFO. As one would also know, there is a process ongoing with the legal position of the CFO. There are discussions between his lawyer and the management, the board of GEBE in terms of the way forward or not with the CFO. So all of these things have to be put in the proper equation to be dealt with. Besides that, one cannot simply appoint members to the board or members to the management board, because we have to deal with the Corporate Governance Council. But we also, when appointing people to permanent appointments are made in terms of the CEO, CFO, or COO, that in accordance with the proper regulations have to, those people have to be screened by the Security Service, the VDSM. So it is not so that government is unaware. It is not so that government has not been meeting. It is not so that government is not preparing to deal with it. But before one step can be made, there's a whole story about who did what and who didn't do and who will be appointed and who will not be appointed. All it does is just muddle everything and create more chaos. And it's more aimed, in my opinion, at creating, destabilizing everything at GEBE if the employees for sure, keep getting mixed signals from information that they are picking up, information that they're reading, all hours of the night. There are little discussions ongoing here and there about who said, who didn't say, who was proposing, who didn't propose. The process is being dealt with within government, and as soon as the appropriate time is there, the information will become public from the part of government. It is almost the same thing that we have whenever ministers, for instance, are being screened. There are all kinds of speculations as to who will be minister of this, who will be minister of that, who will be replacing this one, who will be replacing that one. Names have been mentioned of persons who have been put forward as minister, while those persons have never ever been approached. So one of the things that I like to say, the media should report news and not try to create the news.
May I have a follow-up? Minister Marlin, you made a lot of statements referring to the media, but I will remind you of a statement made by our former Minister of Justice and now Minister of Finance, when Mr. Gusram made a lot of remarks in the IPCO meeting regarding St. Martin. The blame went squarely on the media. If the documentation or the statement or the presentation made to the IPCO was made available, then the media will not get blamed. We do have a job to do. The people do have a right to know. And what I ask you is basically, the unions right now is supporting Mr. Brooks. They want to hold a strike. I understood that you went down there and you're trying to get things settled. Did government ask Mr. Brooks to tender his resignation when you met last week? So I'm asking some real questions because as a media person, I'm not going to take the blame for doing my job.
You're now
Bibi.
asking the question if government asked Brooks. This is the first time you're asking that question. You made more statements than questions, telling me that there are things happening at GB and there are things happening and there are things happening and there are things happening. No question was asked as to whether government thing, and this is again what I'm saying. And if one would read, I think Mr. Brooks made a statement. If he didn't make a statement, Mr. Brooks decided he is stepping down as interim manager because he does not want to be in the center of, let's say, a problem. He applied for the position of COO. He accepted to be temporary manager, but if he's going to be evaluated for the position of temporary manager, then he rather step aside as temporary manager and await government's decision on the appointment of a CEO, the position which he applied for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bibi. Hilbert?
Yes, Minister Lee, Zika, we hear a lot about it. I understand that there is one recorded case on the French side. Are there already recorded cases on the Dutch side?
So far, not to my knowledge, no.
So far, no. Okay, thank you. Minister Jacobs, you spoke about Embrace. The company was presented as a local consultancy, but when I looked them up, it appears that they are based in Texas. Am I totally wrong there, or and that Ms. Lewis actually lives somewhere in Atlanta?
To my knowledge, Hilbert, Ms. Lewis is a local of
Yeah,
St.
yeah,
Martin.
that is true, yes.
As I entered on November 19th, this process had already been finalized. So this was a decision that was taken by the former government and was in the process to be executed. So it reached to the stage where now I explained in the press conference also that there had been no priority list prepared last year.
Yeah.
Normally, it is something that falls within the ministry, and due to whether it's personnel matters or whatever the case may be, I was not there at the time, they were unable to produce a new list. As such, they needed one urgently, and they outsourced it, and it was finalized prior to me getting here. And so the plan continued, and I support it because as study financing, to be able to give out study financing to our students, we need a scientifically generated list.
I'm not questioning the usefulness of the survey, absolutely not, but I was wondering
And
about
as a matter
how,
of course-
how local the company is. That
PricewaterhouseCoopers and Embrace were the two companies that submitted proposals. And from what I've gathered, Embrace has done prior research and other work for government as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Then another question. From the 2016 budget, it appears that the Charlotte Brookson Academy is getting almost $500,000 more subsidy than last year. Could you elaborate on that? Why is this?
Several changes have occurred in the planning for the schools over the course of the year. This budget originally was planned to be submitted, I believe, in August or September. And based on projections of numbers, the subsidy is established.
But it was a huge increase.
It's usually based on student numbers.
So they're getting like, how many students are they then
I
expecting?
have no idea how many they have at this time. I have not looked at the details of it, but based on the calculations submitted, it's on the last numbers as well as projected numbers for the coming school year.
Okay, thank you. Minister Marlin, at Bobby's Marina, there is some filling going in. Vromi has issued a stop order there, and that they have to put everything back as it was. In the meantime, even this week, the work still continues and nobody's doing anything. Are you aware of that?
No.
Oh, well,
The minister, it's often said every day that the prime minister should know everything.
but he doesn't know this, okay.
Unfortunately, the prime minister doesn't know everything. So if there is an issue at Bobby's Marina and Vromi, I suggest you take it up with the minister. I don't want to cross things. I know that there are issues over there, the details of them.
Yeah, okay.
I do not know. What I can also say is that on Thursday coming, the Council of Ministers will be meeting with the owners of Doc Martin, the Doher family, who have been having constant issues and battles with the St. Martin port.
Yeah.
So we want to resolve these issues and ensure that everybody can do what they have to do. But it is kind of awkward that you have government at one hand issuing permits and a government-owned company basically doing battle in essence with government because it's the government who has issued these permits, and it is not Doc Martin who is out there doing something on their own, and now the company is complaining. The harbor has its permits from government. Doc Martin has its permits from government, and seemingly there's a constant dispute, not necessarily between the two, but more initiated by the harbor against them. So we are meeting with them to get their side of the story, and in order to be able to move forward and find a solution to whatever the problems may be.